first I want to ask you, we're going to get to Iowa and that poll and all of that sort of thing. But first I want to ask you about this thing that was just referenced, the undecided voters. Tell me about them. Are they legitimately undecided? There do seem to be pretty distinct choices in this election. What does an undecided voter mean? Or is it really undecided about voting at all?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Mark. And, there's been some stuff even in the last week about that where pollsters have said, well, I'm undecided. They said, well, but have you kind of made up your mind? Well, yeah, I kind of have, but I just haven't told anybody. So I think probably there are less undecideds. I mean, if you look at the hard numbers that pollsters have been throwing out, around 5% to 8%, somewhere in there, people say they're undecided. But I think you've hit on something important, Mark, and that is, if you're undecided, the obvious question is, are you even going to bother to go to the polls, right? I mean, sort of by definition, I don't know why I'm going, but I guess I'm going, So I think that there's probably, some of those folks that are just going to be, sad to say, non-voters in the end. But, there are some late-breaking folks. I mean, there literally are people that will sit around on the night before the old kitchen table thing and say, okay, well, all right, well, yeah, I guess this guy or gal. I mean, that happens.
The Harris moving ahead in Iowa that was released over the weekend, the latest polling there, the Seltzer poll. You know the Seltzer poll so well. You know its dependability in the state of Iowa. We were just talking about the fact that this surge from Harris, while significant, likely won't carry the state of Iowa. In other words, it's not an indicator that she would win Iowa, but it might really be reflective. And I thought some of the drill downs, we'll put the still frames up for you. Some of the breakdowns show that she has support in areas that might be reflected in other states critical to this race. And might that be predictive, Gary?
Yeah, you really have hit on the real essence of why people are even talking about an Iowa State poll the day before the election. Is she going to win Iowa? You'd have to just say, based on all the other polling this year, Mark, based on everything we know about Iowa in the last cycles, it would be extraordinary if she did. But people are reading this as potential tea leaves. Geez, are we missing something? This is clearly an outlier. And, all the major pollsters are saying that, look, we don't have any evidence in any of our polls for this movement in Iowa or other similar states. So who knows? I mean, it's a very reliable, very trusted state poll. And so that's why it's getting attention. If it is accurate, if somehow Harris wins Iowa, then I think you'd have a large number of national political types saying game over. Because not only would it be winning Iowa, it would portend a massive surge in other similar states that would put Harris just way over the top. But I think people are taking this honestly with a grain of salt. Certainly the Republicans are, and even Democrats are kind of pumping the brakes a little bit because they want to, they want to sort of, how do we say it, as we say in the business, control expectations.
Sure. It occurs to me, Tony, let's play Gary a little bit. This is about 90 seconds to 2 minutes of Trump obviously concerned about this poll, but maybe you'd think, well, he's concerned about this poll because maybe he knows about other polling that shows maybe soft spots for him. And then we actually have Ann Seltzer, the couple of comments. This is lifted from CNN. Go ahead to play a little bit for Gary, if you would, please.
I got a poll. I'm 10 points up in Iowa. One of my enemies just puts out a poll. I'm 3 down. Why do they announce a poll that's highly skewed toward Democrats and liberals? Why do they do that? When you read it, they interviewed far more Democrats than they did Republicans. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? And I guess there's a law that they have to say that because they would have preferred not having to say that.
Well, I'm joined now by Ann Seltzer, whose firm, Seltzer and Company, conducted the poll. And back with us is David Axelrod and John King. And first of all, how surprised were you at these numbers? What do you make of them?
She
and
speaks
also,
to the way they took the poll.
Feel free
Go ahead. Keep
respond to what the former president said.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. We first saw the numbers on Tuesday morning. Monday night was the first night in the field. And I walked into the office and I'd seen the unweighted data, and it had Harris leading, and my assistant said, "Did you see the data?" And I said, "I'd like to see weighted data." So the weighting is how we take care of things that would make our poll unrepresentative. We align things with a known population, and we extract from a larger group the people who meet our definition of likely voters, and that is people who've already voted and people who say they will definitely vote. So when former President Trump says we interviewed more Democrats, well, that's what came out of our data. We did nothing to make that happen. I'm a big believer of keeping my dirty fingers off the data. So we did it the way we did it when he won in our final poll twice in 2 election cycles. Very same method.
He said you're an enemy of his. Clearly that's not the case. You have had polls in the past which have shown, that Hillary Clinton wasn't going to do as well in Iowa as a lot of people thought. So you have been, delivered news which has upset Democrats and upset Republicans and people all over the map in the past.
Right, without favor toward one side or the other. I think that the best news I can deliver, and this is true of my non-election related clients, the best news I can deliver is my best shot at what's true. Because then you know what you're working with, and you can make adjustments as you need to. But I can't see that there's any advantage to me or my career in messing with the numbers to make it look a particular way. There's no upsides.
Very good. Thank you. It's funny, Gary, this is something that I've become acutely aware of in this election cycle, and that is something to which Ann Selzer was just referring, which is there is a kind of paid-for poll contagion, which has gone through both sides, right? Where you kind of reverse engineer it, right? You start with, well, we want our guy, or, generically our guy, our candidate, to look good in this poll. And then you reverse engineer somehow the polling. Maybe you can explain to me, or if it's even important, as to how you get there. And so you end up with that result. But what she's saying is, the thing that makes the most sense is, don't you really want to know what the story is there? Or do you just want the PR of a good poll?
Well, it's not hard to reverse engineer a poll, Mark. It happens really simply if one wanted to do it. And that's by the factors that she spoke about. Remember, she used the term weighting. And that's weight as in, density, gravity, not weight like, let's wait around. The point of the matter is every pollster weights their poll. What do I mean by that? They have to determine, because you're not going to get exact numbers, say, of Republicans, Democrats, independents that reflect the electorate, right? So then you have to say, okay, well, we had a little heavier on the Democrats. And then one of the most important factors she's talked about is this notion of, well, are they a likely voter? That is a very tricky thing to determine. Some pollsters say, well, if you voted in the last 2 or 3 consecutive elections, you're a likely voter, whether you voted yet or not, And so that's where things can get really tricky, is determining likely voter, who's actually going to cast a ballot at the end of the day. And by the way, that is a very sophisticated weighting, because it's different, for example, for younger voters than it is for older voters, than it is for different demographics, male, female, race, etc. So that's where this weighting comes in. But I will tell you, in the current election cycle, the so-called internal polls, you may be referring to those. Campaigns conduct their own constantly. They spend a lot of money on that to try to drill down deeper on areas that they want to know about. But in a race this close, that everybody agrees is this close, you can imagine, Mark, it's not going to take much. You move one criteria one way or the other just a little bit, and you can affect a poll significantly in battleground states, or even in a state like Iowa. I mean, 3 points is not a lot. I didn't hear what her margin of error was there on that poll, but that's a small number.
No, that's within the margin of error. You're very good to point that out. Put the screenshot up among seniors. I thought this was interesting. Seniors who tend to lean right. There's the overall number, 47 to 44. But if you look at the drill down numbers, here it is. Women, obviously Harris Lee, I say obviously just because I think that generally speaking, given some of the Trump policies, women tend to now lean toward Trump. But anyway, in this Iowa poll, Harris ahead by 20. Seniors Harris ahead by 19. Voters with a college degree, Harris ahead by 30. The seniors thing really interested me, Gary Dietrich, because I feel as though seniors, as I say, tend to get more conservative as they get older and tend to be really reliable voters. That is a voting block, you know. I always felt that on KGO, just as an aside. You know, as our demographic got older, I felt like, wow, well, you know, you guys are ignoring that demographic. I don't know why you are. They're politically activated. They have money. They're a great demographic for you to advertise to. And yet, you know, in that world of broadcasting, they go, you know, it's 25 to 54, whatever it is. Hey, people after 54 have robust lives and are very much participating in politics and in the economy. Anyway, back to the point. Is there a shift in this country among seniors and women sufficient to change this race?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. And you know, the senior question gets a little tricky. Do they get more conservative? Well, I'll tell you one thing. If you're going to touch the proverbial sacred third rail of politics, that is Social Security, they're going to be really upset about that, right? But they also, depending on the state, you have a lot of seniors who may just be traditionally more liberal, more progressive voters. They care about a variety of things. So, you know, I think the senior demographic is one that's always talked about and fought over. But very interestingly to me, Mark, not as much in this race. There's been a lot more focus on the male-female differential, on the, you know, movement in Latino and Black voters, more GOP than they've been in the past. You know, the sort of non-college educated white voters that seem to, and that includes union voters to a large degree, the blue-collar voters moving kind of that Reagan Democrat drift. You've heard a lot more of those trends than others. Hey, can I throw out one thing for tomorrow night that nobody's going to be talking about in California or probably most of the country, and nobody's cared about Montana forever and ever, amen. But I will tell you, if I'm going to be looking for a tipping point tomorrow night, and like, what is the tea leaves telling us? If the Democrats, and they're expected to lose Montana, but if it especially drifts into Ohio, where Sherrod Brown and his Senate race is now in polls evenly tied with the GOP, Bernie Moreno, who's just come up in the last couple of weeks, those two Senate races, to me, are going to say a lot. If they grab, and Montana's results probably come in fairly soon. If Republicans grab that, they've got the Senate, because everybody's conceded they're going to have the Manchin West Virginia seat. So then if Republicans build on that Senate majority, especially with a state like Ohio, where yes, Trump's been ahead by high single digits, but if they're GOP is able to eke out a Senate victory there, that's going to tell me that, you know, watch out, because, you know, this race may actually be as close as people said it was going to be.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I know that Tester is teetering. I mean, I think that the forecasts, aren't they, Gary, is for a GOP takeover of the Senate, largely because of the seats that you're talking about. Tester, certainly. Brown is probably the toughest Democrat who faces a real struggle, but in other words, he's a durable candidate. He can. It's a legit horse race there. Yeah.
You want to hear something remarkable, Mark? If you haven't heard the numbers, that race, the single most politically expensive race outside of a presidential campaign in U.S. history, there will be, as of tomorrow, $500 million spent on the Ohio Senate race.
Yeah, that's now, in Ohio. God, that's crazy.
That is remarkable. And yes, Sherrod Brown has been a survivor. He has truly been a survivor. But the challenge for him has been, Ohio has been drifting Republican increasingly, as you know, in the last few presidential cycles. And it would have been far better for Brown had he been running in a non-presidential year, when he didn't have to contend with the large Trump turnout that's undoubtedly happening in Ohio. And so it's going to make his job to hold on to that seat much tougher.
Keep taking females for granted, says Jay. Yeah, I mean, the women vote is pretty huge. But I want to go back. We can get to that in a second. I want to quickly, and I don't mean to take it for granted at all by getting back to it in a second, but I just want to back burner it and ask you to follow up. Are you saying that in those senatorial races, when they pull the lever or punch the card for a Republican, that they're likely to also punch the card or pull the lever for a Republican top of ticket, in this case, Trump?
Yeah. What pollsters and actually you don't have to just poll it, because people are asked afterwards in the after action reports, did you cast both your votes, for the Republican or the Democrat? Are you ticket splitting? Ticket splitting has been on the decline. It used to be something that was, people just sort of took for granted, but especially in presidential races. For example, one of the things people say about 2022, where Democrats did not retake control of the House, but almost did. And, there was a lot of movement towards Democrats, and pollsters would say, yeah, but be careful, because it was not a presidential race year. So in the presidential race years in particular, Mark, there has been far less ticket splitting. So yes, what you're saying is what I am saying, what you're asking about. If we see Republicans taking some of these battleground Republican states, I certainly think that bodes well for Trump. And some analysts would say shows that there's some real coattails for Trump in the bottom of the ticket. And by the way, same is true with House seats. I mean, there's going to be, the House is really, if there's a truly exciting game tomorrow, of course, along with the presidential contest, it's going to be people trying to figure out, let's see, the New York 7th District went. I mean, there's several House seats in New York that could tip the balance. So there's going to be a lot of people watching those very closely for those same kind of indicators about, is this going to be a clean sweep for one side or the other?
Do you get a sense of things generally? I'm motivated to this question by this, and I do want to get to women who I do feel, have a relevance, obviously, all the time. But this time round, I mean, as they've seen, in my judgment, their rights stripped away, they really may show up in huge, huge numbers. But I'm seeing this. I genuinely don't know what's moving the senior vote, abortion rights or just Trump fatigue, January 6th. And that leads me to this broader question, which is the border and the economy are the things that Trump has hammered. I assume that's because that's what Americans care most about. So January 6th and women's reproductive rights, et cetera, they slip down that list. What's your list, Gary Dietrich, as to the things that motivate most in this election?
Well, they certainly, through the course of this election cycle, you've hit on it. I mean, all the polls have shown, all the focus groups have shown that the economy / inflation has been number one, immigration has been number two, and typically abortion has been number three. And then after that, you have kind of concerns about broader, people use the term just democracy, right? Preserving democracy. You can throw January 6th into that. You can throw voting regulations, things like that in there. And then down below that is where you're going to get things like climate change, et cetera. One of the things real quick on seniors, one of the reasons why you haven't heard a lot about seniors is because, the argument that, in the past was, well, the Republicans are going to, cut your Social Security and stuff like that. That has just not gained a lot of traction in this cycle for whatever reason, perhaps because Congress is. So that's the state of that. But that's kind of your issue priority as voters place them.
It's fascinating. Now to women. Doesn't it feel as though women this election cycle are going to show up and have shown up in numbers that were substantial? You certainly saw it in the midterms, right, Gary?
Well, the midterms, I mean, I think it's really important. You cannot talk about 2022 without talking about when it happened in relationship to the SCOTUS decision on Roe v. Wade. I mean, that election, both sides agree, was truly animated by that Supreme Court decision, it was half a century in the making, right? So that is huge. And of course, Democrats have counted on that same emphasis for women this time around. I mean, it's not nearly as powerful, but one of the things that's interesting is when you have, it's remarkable when you look at the gender difference, right? You're talking about a 20-point swing in gender between men for Trump and women for Harris. And one of the big keys is what you're talking about, Mark, and that is, are women going to turn out in a higher number? Given that differential in polling, you get, say, women turn out, let's just say 5% greater than men, right, than they would normally. If they're animated by that and they turn out in greater numbers, that could obviously bode exceptionally well for Vice President Harris.
I have to say, this is just my view of women and men. If I needed a vote, or if I needed something delivered, I'm sorry. I want a woman to do it, not a guy to do it. A guy meets somebody cute at the whatever, he gets late, has a drink, and doesn't make it to the poll. I'm sorry, Gary. My faith in men is pretty low. But we'll see. Obviously, as you suggested, both sexes and all of these different components to the election are animated by so many different things. So what is your MadAss schedule on election night? I've got to think they've got you just working across, you've got iHeartRadio, you've got these CBS television stations. Your media obligations have to be substantial, I would think.
Yeah, Mark, and my apologies if I'm not going to be able to jump on the mother of all election night shows, and that's the Mark Thompson Show. That's the Mark Thompson Show tomorrow night, which I really want to encourage your loyal followers to tune into. I wish I could be part of it. Here's the problem in the modern media, Mark. You understand this better than most. The problem is not only do I have radio obligations and TV obligations, but multiple platforms within CBS. So, for example, we're part of out of the state capital in Sacramento, which is where I'm based. We have a duopoly, right? We have our CBS 13 station, but we also have our KMAX 31 station. So we have newscasts on both. Plus, we have our streaming cast. So we'll have an online streaming cast going that fills in between all those. And then, of course, we have a crack social media team. And they want some original bites from me, of course, that we can post on our social media and all. So that's the challenge. In the old days, you had one TV camera in front of you and one radio microphone, and it ain't quite that simple these days, Toto. You know what I mean? Hey, Mark, can I take 15 seconds to say one thing that's been important to me? And I shared this on CBS at the end of my hit, at the end of last week, and I'm going to say it a lot this week. I totally get it. The passions in this election could not be higher. The polls could not be closer. I just simply want to be one more voice saying, folks, at the end of the day, let's keep our heads, right? Let's remember we are one nation. We are all Americans. This too shall pass. 2 years from now, there's going to be another election cycle. 4 years from now, there's going to be another one. I just think, Mark, that's so important, given the level of anxiety that people have been expressing about what happens after the election.
Well, that's such a good thing to say. And I must say this, in the next half hour, I am going to talk a little bit about the culture of retribution led by Trump. And sadly, and I know you're a kind of a political atheist, or you're not leaning one way or the other, but so I speak only for myself. But you can see how this culture of retribution led by Donald Trump has extended and changed the very nature of so many of the political systems to which you've talked about, which is like a safe voting place, B, being okay with the results, challenging them in ways that, have a civility and legality to them. So I see American political culture changing radically. And I love that you remind us that, we need to remember that we've got to continue past this. It's sad that we become so impassioned that sometimes we lose sight of that. So I appreciate those comments.
Yeah. Well, last thing I'll just say about this, Mark, super quick, is, you're going to hear a lot more about this in coming weeks, but new reporting out about China's hacking of people's social media, about all kinds of things. We have to remember we are not an island, okay? I mean, we as Americans need to band together for some very important policy things that are happening internationally, and I'm sure you and I will be talking about those in the weeks and months ahead.
I look forward to that, and look forward to your material across the iHeartRadio network and also on the CBS television stations. How about it for the great Gary Dietrich? Thanks, Gary. And I do want to mention that Gary is brought to us every week by Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. And if you're relocating into or from Northern California, or even considering relocating into or from Northern California, you need a highly respected real estate professional, and Bill Campbell is that person. Remax Gold. Call or text him, 530-448-7474, 530-448-7474. Bill Campbell and Remax Gold. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.